it's something that gets spoken about quite a lot in business, and it's quite a popular thing for people to talk about how we embrace failure and we want people to fail. And I feel like it's easier said than done. Maybe let's start with you, Herman. What are your thoughts on failure and failure in business and failure in life? Or failing, maybe not failure.
Well, I I've gotten a hell of a lot more comfortable with failing or failure. I actually I haven't looked at what a dictionary definition of failure is. So but in my mind, I have a definition which is difficult to put into words now. But the way that I think about it is failing is a very natural way of learning.
Yeah.
What I think most of us get so frustrated with is where we are in situations where we feel like we have this one chance to either get it right or not. And that's not often that's true. And a lot of it comes back to how am I feeling about it, and not so much about how I'm perceived, but it comes back to the ego.
Yep, I knew you were going to bring that up.
Because I'm thinking of certain examples. If I don't know, if I play darts and my best intention is to get the dart into the trip 20 box, and you know my world's not going to collapse if I don't achieve that.
Yeah.
It's great if I can, but that's not so. But if the brakes on my car fail when I'm careering down a hill, then that would be, a hell of a lot more severe.
Yeah.
Um, so, but the things that I think, especially in our personal lives, not even in the work sense, where we put a lot of pressure on ourselves about while I failed at that, is so unnecessary.
Yeah. Don't you feel like, I feel like because it's such a popular concept nowadays, and everyone's talking about embracing failure, that it sometimes gets used as an excuse to not prepare and not do things right. So there was a methodology at one of my previous employers, which was called the right first time methodology. And it was about making sure that you're setting yourself to get something right the first time rather than allowing yourself to try something and fail. Um, I've just been thinking about that a little bit, and about Einstein has the, if I'm given an hour to solve a problem, I'll spend 55 minutes thinking about the problem and 5 minutes thinking about the solutions.
Yeah,
Um, so this idea that I feel like a lot of people will just rush into something without planning and prepping because you're given this excuse or this it's okay to fail. And I don't know if that's necessarily a good approach, or maybe I'm just taking it to the extreme. Where
no, I think you probably have enough experience of observing that in a workplace and seeing, well, you know what, you're using the excuse of we're allowed to fail for not preparing sufficiently.
yeah,
And you're 100% correct. The, we're not saying that it's okay to fail means that, well, you don't have to prepare, you don't have to practice. You don't. If I want to run a marathon, you know, of course I know that if I don't if I don't if I don't run and make sure that I can at least get to, I don't know, 75% or whatever of what the total distance is then I'm sure to fail.
yeah,
That's a fact.
Yeah.
So it is not meant to be an excuse for not preparing or not practicing.
Yeah.
Um, so an example of that is if I decide to take up tennis as a sport, then I cannot expect to win my first tennis match,
Yeah.
or even compete. So, in other words, in so many other things that we encounter on a daily basis, whether that's work or just general life or so, if I decide that I want to, I don't know, start writing poetry, I cannot expect my first poem to be um, any good.
Yeah.
But the only way that I am going to get good at anything is through trying and failing and then figuring out where I failed and why I failed.
Yeah. So I think that's the thing about failure is there has to be, I mean, I think it's Tom Bilyeu says it's the most potent learning opportunity, failure. And there has to be a learning from it in order for it to be positive. If you're not learning anything from your failures, then obviously it is a failure, and that's not a good thing.
Correct. Yeah, that's very true. And I was thinking about what is a failure. So that means that you didn't achieve the desired result.
Yeah.
Would that be a good way to describe a failure?
Yes, I think so. So going into something with an expectation and not living up to that expectation.
Yeah, but it's not fatal. It's not. I don't know. I'm trying
Yeah.
to think of examples or ways where it really is life and death.
Suppose if you're a surgeon, they have less grace when it comes to failing.
Correct.
Yeah.
And airline pilots and bus drivers and
Yeah.
et cetera, et cetera. So there are lots, which is why you obviously find that there's a very rigorous um, training um, and regular testing, et cetera, et cetera, both from the pilot or the surgeon and also from the equipment that they use to perform that job,
Yeah.
and so on. But for most of us, the failing is, well, I didn't get it right, whether I expected 100%, and even if you prepared very well for it.
Yeah.
So I was just in a recent example, last, I think it was about a week ago or so, that SpaceX launched that new rocket of theirs.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing managed to, can't remember exactly how
Yeah.
high it went before it exploded. Um, and a lot of people said, "Oh, what a total failure."
Yeah.
Whereas if you go and read or listen to some of the discussions that they've had with the engineers and so on, go, "Well, what a phenomenal success."
Yeah. We
So they
now
look
know
at all
X,
the
Y, Z.
things
Yeah. Yeah.
exactly, and in there was one article that mentioned that they had already identified something like 1,000 improvements
Wow.
through what was considered to be this failure by some people who don't understand and know. Anyway, so yeah, what looks like a failure to one person is actually a phenomenal success to somebody else.
Yeah. So I was just thinking about it again. I feel like it's mostly about ego because when we're
Yeah,
looking at failure for ourselves, it's an expectation that we've set of ourselves, and bringing that back to a personal example is um, I was quite gung ho about writing a book, and that I was on the path to writing my first book, and I've stopped writing my book. And I really considered that a huge failure, and I was really disappointed in myself. and finding all sorts of ways to punish myself for my bad behavior. But I think there's a quote actually that you shared with me many years ago, and it's Zig Ziglar, is that right? Zig Ziglar?
Yeah,
And it's something about failure as an event, not a person. And
yeah,
what I tend to do when I feel like I've failed at something that I set for myself, a goal I've set for myself, is I really make it quite personal, and I get really angry at myself for failing and for being a failure. And I think I need to try to reframe my mind with that, where it's just an event, it's one thing, and maybe I failed in my own mind, but maybe it's given me an opportunity to think about how I can do it differently or do it better next time. Um, yeah, it's not no one's dying.
no, no one's dying. As you say, it is about the ego. And one of the things that I often wonder about is at what stage of our lives does does ego come into play? You know, because there's the old example of, well, children learn to walk and to talk and to, do a whole, well, everything through failing
Yeah,
and then adjusting and trying again and failing again, etc., etc., etc. And then at what age um, do you do humans generally become a lot more aware? And is it the human, the person themselves, that become more aware? Does the ego develop, or is it through behavior? Is it where your parents start, instead of I don't know, being all excited and clapping and praising, to going, oh, that was terrible. You shouldn't have done that.
yeah. Or is it that as we get older and our brains mature and we learn more about the world, we get more cynical and more skeptical? I think one of the examples that you just put into my head is about you're talking about children and how they have this, like, they don't fear anything. They're so excited to try anything. And one of those
Yeah.
examples that pops into my head is at like a fun fair and going on the rides. And when I go with my niece and nephew, they want to try everything. They want to go on all these rides, and I look at the rusty bolts and think, when last was this maintained? Does the guy who's operating it know what he's doing?
Yeah, but even if you look amongst that particular age group, whether you take a group of 5-year-olds or 10-year-olds and so on, you actually see the different behavior there. Some
Yeah,
of them are more gung ho and very happy to go on the rides, and others maybe a little bit more. Um, so so I'm not sure what the how much the environmental influences, if I can add parents and teachers and siblings, etc.,
yeah,
etc., to that group. When do we actually start seeing things as, well, I'm not going to try this because I'm scared to fail,
yeah,
versus yeah, you know what, I'm going to give it a go. If I get on a bicycle or on a skateboard, if I fall off, it's probably going to hurt a little bit, but I don't know. Do we even think like that? I don't think so.
yeah,
But then if you jump ahead to to where we find ourselves in a work environment, because that's very often where we encounter it. You're given a task, you have the skills to accomplish that task, but on any given day you can fail. It happens.
yeah.
Very, very few tasks, I think, in the modern workplace that are just so repeatable that there's zero chance of something going wrong or failing.
Yeah. Also, often because of the nature of the work environment, if you're not trying new things, you're failing anyway. And part of trying new things is not knowing what the end result will be.
Yeah, exactly. Um, and that's generally where, you know, my problem is with failure, with people looking for, when they're given a task, to look for a recipe or um, a, a, a set of instructions of how to complete this task without failing.
Yeah.
And a lot of the time, we will be comfortable to deliver substandard, even to our own measure. We will deliver substandard rather than risk failing.
Yeah.
That's a kind of, thing that I would like to stamp out and say, hey, listen, I'm comfortable. But obviously, there's a lot of factors. The environment must be
Yeah.
conducive to that, etc.
So how do you overcome a fear of failure? I suppose in a business context is the easiest way to look at it, but I'm very selfish and I'm thinking about in my own life.
Well, I think you said, earlier we spoke about the ego, and it doesn't matter whether you talk about it in a business sense or you're talking about it from a personal level. Eventually, it comes down to, so you often hear these commentators, and I don't know if they just don't know what they're talking about, but you hear people talk about either the CEO of a well-known company or a political leader, and people speculate about, oh, this person is just worried about his or her legacy.
Mm-hmm.
This is all about what people will say. And I often wonder to myself, really, are people that egotistical that they are willing to take a nation to war because they're thinking about their legacy? Or, if it's a huge company with thousands of employees, does the CEO really sit there and think, you know what, definitely I'm going to do X, Y, and Z because of my legacy?
Yeah.
And I don't think that is the case. I honestly don't.
Yeah.
So I don't think there's a lot of difference. Yeah, maybe the stakes are slightly higher and slightly different, if you're the CEO of a big company with thousands of employees, you have a responsibility too. And also, if you run a small company with 2 to 3 employees, you have certain responsibility. But a lot of it comes back to the, well, am I prepared to fail? So you take the stakes into account, etc., etc. But ultimately, it comes back to that: how am I going to feel, and how is it going to reflect on me? And I'm trying to think of examples of people who were. I mean, Thomas Edison is the one that jumps out, and the thing about the what was it that he so famously said about inventing the light bulb is, I found 10,000 ways not to make a light bulb, or something to that
Yeah.
effect.
Yeah.
Um, and that's a good thing to remember. Is a lot of we see either the success or we see the failure. We don't see that, all of that in between.
Yeah.
And often, if you can get past that first few attempts, so in terms of the example that you mentioned earlier of your own experience with writing, I mean, this is your first real kind of, hey, I'm putting it out there. I think I want to write.
Yeah.
And then within a relatively short period of time, feeling like, oh, geez, I failed at it.
Yeah.
Well, you haven't failed as a writer, um, not at all.
Yeah.
You can frame it that way, and you can never pick up a pen again.
Yeah. You can say, I'm not a writer. That's what I did with my reading, however many years ago. I'm not a reader because I couldn't read a book for whatever
Yeah,
reason. And now I'm on book number 14. So
yeah.
I am a reader.
So it is very much a personal thing. I do think that society and environment and so on play a big role. But as individuals, I think we must just show a bit more courage
Yeah,
in terms of taking taking chances,
yeah,
um, and learning. You also know the other side of that is if you overcome failure, that that sense of um, accomplishment,
yeah,
um, when you actually feel like, okay, cool, I've overcome that.
yes. And also being able then to use that to help other people who might be finding themselves in a similar failing situation, to be able to guide them because you've overcome it, um, is probably a good way to look at it as well. By failing, you can become a teacher.
Yeah, absolutely. I think now that you mention that, I suppose a lot of it has to do with how people around you react and how you react to other people. So how can I be a better um, mentor, a better role model
Yeah,
for people who have failed at a task, but it doesn't mean that they're a failure.
yeah. This is really interesting, and I can find an example already. So, with my reading, which I'm super excited about and confident about, and I haven't missed a day since I started reading. And a friend of mine had recently, unrelated, posted on her Instagram that she was really struggling to read. Like, how do you get through all of these books that you have on your bookshelf? I don't know where to start. I don't know. I've got so
Mm,
much that I want to read. And so I said to her, well, my approach has been to read a chapter a day, every single day of one book. And she said that that's helping her now to get into reading and getting through all the books. So the fact that
great.
I was able to help someone when a few years ago I thought I was no longer a reader and couldn't read is proof of the fact that failing can help you to become a teacher.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it's crucial that we all think about that a bit more often. And when we encounter situations like that in the workplace, um, to to look for the opportunities to make sure that when somebody fail at a task, to frame it in such a way that it doesn't make the person feel like a failure,
Yeah,
but view it as the event that it is.
that sounds like a great sum up of what we were talking about and good advice for the future. Um, I think what I would also add to that is just maybe to, I'm big on journaling at the moment, to write down your failures and the things that you've learned from them. So maybe things that you've considered failures in the past, which maybe when you think of them now, you know that they're not failures because it brought you to where you are today. It made you stronger. It had all these good effects on you. But maybe write those down and write the good effects that you've had and how you've been able to help and guide other people because of the experience that you went through.
I think that's great advice, yes.
Thank you, Herman. Until next time.
Thanks, Ali.